Hey, Year 11s, welcome back. We're going to be looking at chapter 15 of Every Man in This Village is a Liar today. This chapter is called There Would Be Consequences, and it deals with Megan Stack's interviews with a young man called Ahmed, who she meets after she's decided she wants to interview a young Shiite about the events that are happening in Iraq. It comes just after, Atwar Bajat has died. So this chapter in the book is situated in Baghdad as well and Iraq. Okay, so if we look at the structural reasons for having this chapter straight after the previous one, it maybe adds some weight to the idea that Iraq has many issues. Okay, because there are two chapters about Iraq. Sometimes with the other chapters in the book, I know you've not read them all, but some of the chapters are just singular chapters. So it speaks that she wanted to really kind of flesh out what was going on in Iraq with her book. When we can look at chapter 14 and say that the central premise of that was that she meets a woman who reminds her of herself, and this helps her to realize there's a massive difference between the American journalists and the Iraqi journalists. So, whilst the Iraqi journalists are sort of doing it as a vocational calling where they feel they need to spread the truth about the situation, the Americans are sort of in a very privileged position, and that privilege is dealt with again here. So it's kind of that idea of being a bystander in the conflict, and also what responsibility do you have as a journalist in these situations. So these ethical issues come up quite a lot in this particular chapter about what is a journalist for while they're there, because as you see with Ahmed's story, doesn't quite go to plan. So there we go. Anyway, we'll get on with the reading of the book. As before, I will stop a few times and talk through some of the main things that you could be discussing. All right. After Atwar died, the months spun out fast, hot and bloody. After Atwar died, the months spun out fast, hotter and bloodier, until another summer caught Baghdad in its claws. So we've got this idea of the personification again, summer catching Baghdad in the claws. So things are hot here. So we've got this idea that things are tightening up a little bit. All right. Ariel Sharon fell into a coma and was stripped of his job as Israeli Prime Minister. Iran announced the successful enrichment of uranium. In Iraq, it was dying and more dying, death getting stuck in the glue of itself. A metaphor. You didn't know how to tell the story anymore. When I returned to Baghdad in the summer of 2006, I went looking for a young Shiite, somebody whose life and aspirations and circumstances could serve as an emblem for a tortured land. So a couple of things here. Ariel Sharon was the leader of Israel, as it obviously says there, okay? And there's a little bit of a significant shift there in the leadership of Israel. You've already read about Israel, so you can link those two together. Iran announcing successful enrichment of uranium discusses the idea that Iran could potentially become a nuclear power, all right? So there's always this constant threat, okay? And Megan Stack just kind of getting on with her job. She wants somebody to serve as an emblem for a tortured land. So she may have got this idea from looking at Atwar Bajat and seeing that she herself served as a kind of emblem for Iraq. So maybe Megan Stack is looking for somebody else who can kind of fit the narrative that she wants to tell about this Iraq as a place that is tortured and, not just this one-dimensional place. Okay. At Baghdad University, heat beat the air stiff as egg whites. So I've got a couple of pictures of Baghdad University there on the side of the screen. Dust flew loose from the dying grasses, shaking like pepper into the lungs, and the trees struggled to hold up their branches. Students trickled down the scorched paths and shaded lanes to the parking lot and the street beyond. Eyes low and books clutched over their hearts. They moved away when we tried to talk to them. The university had gone to war with the rest of the country. professors had been murdered and driven into exile. Militiamen moved among the students. You couldn't just blurt it out, "Are you Shiite?" So we get this impression here of the university as somewhere that is quite stifling in a way. Okay, the heat makes the air stiff as egg white. So Megan's left again playing on her proclivity, which means love for writing similes. All right, she does this quite a bit, and then we get shaking like pepper into the lungs. So again, this idea that it's not a nice area to be, it's quite oppressive to be there, and that's described in the way that she talks about the setting. This idea that the professors have been murdered and driven into exile shows that, quite often in regimes which are tyrannical, you will find educators are controlled and put down because they don't want um, these educators to spread ideas that might get people to question the regimes they live under. Okay, so the books being clutched to their hearts by the students are symbolic, perhaps, of their desire to learn, or on the flip side, it could be that they only want to, read this one thing or look this one way. So if you have something closed over your heart, it can make you sort of secretive. So it could be an indicative of a couple of things. It could be either that they love their education, or it could be that they are like closed books and they don't want to talk to Megan. So I'll leave you to decide what you want to read into that. And that's the beauty of reading, because obviously we can read a multiple things, because every text gives us plural meanings, but depending on how we want to read it, and that's how you use it for evidence as well. So whatever point you make about the text, as long as you can find the evidence to support what you're saying, then you're probably right. Anyway, moving on from that. You couldn't just blurt it out, "Are you Shiite?" So she's trying to find a Shiite person, but she knows that she can't just blurt it out because it could be dangerous for them. We had to finesse, talk about politics and the situation. See how the situation there is in capitals, like it's a proper noun, and really it's not, it's just kind of the political situation. Listen for dropped hints. Iraq was fractured enough that people tipped their hand when they talked politics. So tip their hand means showed their cards. Okay, so if you are talking about politics, it's easy for Megan to kind of discern whether or not you're a Shiite or a Sunni. We stopped a young man, but he was shy and inarticulate. We stopped a girl with a Winnie the Pooh lunchbox, but she turned out to be a Sunni. Then there was Ahmed, stretching in the shade of a spreading tree, jouncing on worn running shoes. When I approached, he stood his ground, cast judging eyes over my face, my clothes, my notebook. Then, satisfied, he gazed at the horizon and answered my questions in nearly perfect English. Caesar, the translator, faded back and finally sprawled on shaded grass. Ahmed's flawless sentences rolled out. So a couple of things to note about Ahmed. He's got worn running shoes, which is indicative in his description there that he is quite poor. Okay, because we get the adjective worn there. So by putting adjectives into the text, a writer can really convey the meaning. Okay. Also, we have this idea that he can speak flawless English. All right. So these flawless sentences rolling out demonstrate a kind of admiration from Megan, in the same way that she had an admiration for Antoine Bajat. Okay. So the way that Megan frames the people in these places that she talks to is often quite effusive and positive, because of her respect for them. Okay. Ahmed was 23 years old, a Shiite living in the urban killing fields of Baghdad's High al-Alamar neighborhood. He had the kind of pinched face you see all over the world and never on a wealthy man. So again, the description of his face demonstrating his wealth or lack thereof, linking that to the worn shoes, we get this picture of him as being somebody who is, quite worn. We can compare that. We can draw comparisons between that and, perhaps the state sometimes of some of the people in night. All right, so that idea, and we can also compare and draw differences between that and Atwa at the beginning, but also Atwa towards the end. So describing people's faces as worn is indicative that they are facing conflicts in their lives. Okay. The kite's corner jutted cheekbones over wasted dents, eyes deep and suspicious and darting, too dark to tell the pupil from the iris. It was the hardness of his face that was familiar, the anger that glimmered deep behind his eyes like a piece of light at the bottom of a deep well. The face of a man who is learning, bit by bit, the limitations of empty pockets and lowly family stature. So again, reinforcing there the idea of his lack of money. Okay. He ran all the time, ran until the flesh burned off his bones. We get the impression of a man who is running perhaps away from something, or he's just very hardworking. Yeah. So he's running. So this would explain his worn features as well. He was running that day in a t-shirt and old jeans and sneakers he bought secondhand. When Saddam was still around, Ahmed had run the half marathon on Iraq's national team. Now he came to the university campus every day to train, though he couldn't afford to attend classes. So think about the pictures of the university there. There's an area where he can actually run around, all right? But it's probably not safe for him to run around actual Baghdad, so that's why he's chosen to run around the university. But he can't attend classes. Okay, we get the indication that he's intelligent enough, but he can't afford it. The college kids bustled past to brighter futures as he worked on his body, the only part of him that had ever been profitable. He'd picked up his girlfriend on campus. She was a college girl drifting forward while he ran circles around the grounds. So we get this idea of using the alliteration there with bustled and brighter. So this idea that the college kids are busy and he's kind of getting left behind. She's drifting forward, but he's circling around the ground. So we get this impression here of a life that's not being fully lived to the extent that it could be. Why do you run so much? I asked him. To forget, he blurted. So immediately he says to forget, and so it's not running necessarily for enjoyment, it's running for, to escape the reality. Okay, so we get this idea that he's doing this as a form of escapism. He blurted, and then he shrugged a little, as if to say, I know this sounds melodramatic, but it's also true. I do this to forget the problems, the situation outside. I can't stay in the house all day. My father's afraid. He says, I'll give you anything to stay home, but I can't. And that makes a problem between me and my father. Even my girlfriend, we had a fight yesterday. In my neighborhood, now, we live one afraid from the other, because we don't know who anybody is. When I drive to my house and come home at night, they think I work with the government or with the terrorists. They don't know. They're afraid. Each one is afraid now. So we get immediately this idea that living in this place is something that is hard. We know that the title of the book is Every Man in This Village is a Liar. And there's this idea that everybody in this situation in Iraq is sort of very suspicious of each other because they could be informing on each other. If they're working with the Americans, they're suspicious of that as well. So that's why there needs to be the secrecy around it. And we also get the indication that there's an interesting father-son relationship here. So that's something that you can compare with the father-son relationship in Night. He was Shiite though, so maybe he was pleased with the newfound political power his people had picked up since the war. Maybe he viewed these hard times as transitory. He frowned. So Megan has asked that, because the Shiites are in power, does Ahmed think he's going to benefit from this? But his response to that is frowning, which shows that perhaps he doesn't have a positive response to that. They took the power place, but it's too bad, he said. The problem in the past was just Sunni rule. Now it's just Shia rule. It's stupid. We have to find a balance between Sunni and Shia. I just follow my mind. I think that's the right thing. God gave us a brain to think, not to follow. So in a similar way to Atwar, even though he's Shia himself, he believes that everybody should be balanced. Okay, he said, when Saddam was in charge, the Sunnis were in charge, and that was a problem. Now the Shias are in charge, that's just a problem. Okay, most Iraqis are ignorant. They don't understand that. If you say Ali al-Sistani is bad, they want to kill you. But if you ask, why do you follow him? They can't answer. So Ali al-Sistani was the Grand Ayatollah, is still think the Grand Ayatollah, which is like the Shia kind of equivalent sort of the Pope. Um, and you know, here's just making the point that if somebody says he's bad, so if a Sunni said he was bad, they'd want to kill him. But then if you ask a Shia why he follows him, sometimes they can't answer. And there's this indication there that sometimes people don't really know why they're angry with another faith. So I suppose the equivalent could be here, Protestant and Catholic. Sometimes you'll hear a Catholic say, "Oh, all the Protestant ideas are wrong, they're stupid," or a Catholic Protestants say, "All the Catholic ideas are bad." But then when you actually ask them why they follow what they do specifically, they might not be able to exactly tell you. Okay, so it's like he's kind of indicating here that not enough people in Iraq are thinking, particularly the fundamentalists who are causing all the violence, and that's indicated there where he said God gave us a brain to think, not to follow. So that contrast between having a brain to think, not to follow, is quite important there, right? And that can be drawn, sort of the comparison there can be drawn with people, in the other book, Night, just following and not thinking about what they're doing. So the SS and stuff. He didn't want to talk anymore. His body was turning away, his face fixed in expectation of goodbye. But he took my notebook and copied down his mobile telephone number before bounding off into the stifling gold of day. This Ahmed, he's noble, Caesar said as we walked back to the car. The way he answered the questions is great. You know what I mean? I did. So Caesar, the translator, thinks Ahmed is great. And Megan thinks Ahmed is great. And again, we get that technique that she loves so much to just have a single sentence on a line to really emphasize it. I wanted to go to Ahmed's house to see the streets and rooms, to meet his family, but I couldn't go to Hey Al-Amal without signing their death warrants. Nor could he visit our place. We couldn't invite a stranger off the street to see the checkpoints and the layout, to glimpse the faces of the Iraqis who lied to their families and neighbours about working with foreigners. Everybody had too much to lose. So here's the conundrum that's being faced when she's trying to get somebody from, just an everyday Iraqi to talk to and to interview. Okay, if they work with her, that can put them at danger. But also, if she brings him to the journalists' offices, he might see the people who work with the journalists every day who are lying about where they are because they don't want to be killed. So it's a fine balance here. Everybody has to be very secretive. So I called Ahmed and arranged to meet neither here nor there, but in the brick-sheathed purgatory of the Babylon Hotel. So the Babylon Hotel, there's an image of that over there. Okay, it's one of the big hotels in Baghdad. All right, but here it's called the brick-sheathed purgatory. So it's got that old sort of 1960s architectural style. And purgatory is a place where people went to be punished, obviously. I had been encouraged by colleagues to think of the Babylon Hotel as a refreshing liberation from our claustrophobic offices, a small, accessible slice of a deadly country. But like everything else in Iraq, the hotel had turned weird and sad. It had been, before, a popular place for posh weddings, but it had gone derelict and sinister, full of tight, hot air and hard glances. So we get this idea of this hotel, which in the 60s, as I said in the previous context video, Baghdad was bustling, like the equivalent of Dubai. There would have been lots of parties and stuff going on there. But now, in the middle of war, even though it's a safe haven for journalists and the like, it is derelict, tight, hard glances. So again, with her description, everything being built up to be quite oppressive. Sitting in the sticky cave of the lobby was like squatting in a dried husk of beehive. All industry and motion and joy drained away. Abandoned rooms rising into the sky overhead. Thin natural light filtered through streaked windows. Dusty stairways rose to dead ends and locked doors. Darkened corridors disappeared into shadows. I passed the security guards at the front doors, tugged open my bag to show the contents, and stayed silent, wondering who they were, who their friends were. The footsteps of the armed gunman echoed behind mine in the great halls. He talked quietly to the guards, and they didn't take his gun away. The bodyguard was skinny and owl-eyed. Every time I looked at him, I had a queasy urge to run until I lost him. I hated having him there, and so I pretended he had nothing to do with me. This poor man who'd been paid to kill people for my protection. Still, the knowing itched at the back of my thoughts. So again, her tension between, just wanting to be free here, like she was when she wanted to cross the parking lot in the previous chapter. She doesn't want this bodyguard, but she knows that it's a sign that they need to protect her. So. The Babylon Hotel had a lobby cafe where nobody ever came to take your order, a men's barber shop, and a women's beauty salon. The beauty parlour was a gaudy grotto stuffed with cloth flowers and cans of cheap hairspray the size of rocket launchers. Upstairs there was a grubby, smoky restaurant cut from a 1970s disco hall with deep brown pod seats on low tables. There was also a sad little gift shop where I bought that summer a baseball cap embroidered with the Iraqi flag and the promise, tomorrow will be better. So this sort of itching idea that everything in there is terrible, okay? In the previous chapter, she described, colour as being welcoming when she was talking about it in terms of Aswat Bajan. When we get to the beauty parlour in this, everything is described as gaudy and stuffed with cloth flowers, okay? She even compares the hairspray to the size of a rocket launcher, just showing how suffused this whole area is with the idea of war as well, okay? And then when we get to that promise, tomorrow will be better, it sounds like a fake promise. It's reminiscent in a way of the way that she's written it out in the capitals of the promises that you get. There's a book by George Orwell called 1984 where all of the slogans are written in capitals, and it kind of reminds you of that. So if anybody has read that, which a lot of people have, it's kind of this idea that the state is promising something, but it will never happen. All right, so it's kind of this ironic idea that this is never going to happen. I didn't really expect Ahmed to show up. Somebody would talk him out of it. Something would go wrong. The meeting was a risk for both of us, based on ill-advised mutual trust. He could get spotted and tarred a traitor. As for me, I had to trust he hadn't sold me off to somebody in the neighbourhood. I know where you can find an American. She'll be waiting for me at 2 on Friday. So here in this italics, reminiscent of an old spy movie, where she's kind of has the ideas in her head that she's going to be sprung because he's sold her off. But obviously that's not the case. But there he was, grinning a shy grin and loping my way, the same jeans and t-shirts hanging off his skinny frame. His girlfriend swished behind in skirts, tinkling in costume jewellery, and ramped up on high heels, polite smile under her makeup. So in contrast to Ahmed, we get the girlfriend, she's tinkling in costume jewellery. So we've got these, like this onomatopoeia that she's tinkling along, and she's ramped up in high heels. So as opposed to somebody modest like Ahmed, we get this contrast of the girlfriend. So they seem like an ill-matched pair in this particular situation. I'm so happy you came, I cried in relief. Me too. Let's have some tea. We climbed up to the disco restaurant and I began to extract, piece by piece, the story of Ahmed. So here, using the term extract obviously gives it a clinical precision. So Megan here is talking about her journalism being like a procedure. What did Ahmed think when he heard the war was coming? So this is the question she's asked. He didn't know what to make of it. A dust storm tinted the air blood red for 2 days straight. So this idea of like the impending war is described once again by Megan Stack through her use of imagery. Okay. Ahmed's family thought it was an omen. So an omen is something that's a bad sign. The neighbors said it was the end of the world. His family had fled Baghdad for Karbala when the invasion began. They got so scared they dug pits in the yard, planning to hide underground if the fighting grew too intense. Ahmed dug for 12 hours without stopping, hollowing out useless craters, working just to feel his muscles ache, to create the illusion of action and control. Everyone was afraid, the women, the children. You have to do something to make them less afraid. Even if it's a lie, you have to do something. So here we get this just one snapshot picture of what happened when, war came to Baghdad. Okay, so like it was the end of the world. They left, people fled, they were digging for hours. So just imagine the scene where, America had decided that it was going to attack Baghdad under the auspices, the idea that they had these weapons of mass destruction. Okay, and people, hundreds and hundreds of people, just like Ahmed, who, were just living their lives under the regime, and they weren't even um, they weren't even on the side of the people who were in charge, but these people were the ones who were quite often killed because of what happened in that war. I was entirely sure they'd kick Saddam Hussein out, and I was glad. I was sure it would make a difference in 5 or 10 years. Maybe our kids will face a different life, not like our life. So here he's saying that there's a positive to the invasion. Okay, he's saying that he thought it was good that they would kick him out, and the kids might face a different life. So there's an element of hope there. Ahmed had sailed through high school on smarts and taught himself perfect English by listening to BBC Radio, which is an English radio station. But there was no money for college. He had to find work and prop up his family. His father, he told me that first afternoon in the Babylon Hotel, had political problems. In Iraq, political problems can mean anything. Politics of power, machismo, tribal pull, wasta. So I've highlighted what wasta is down there so you can have a look at that. Even a casual squabble with the wrong person can swell ominously into a political problem. So political problem here is sort of like a euphemism for, you've done something bad and generally against the state, and people will come after you for it. Ahmed's father had a disagreement in the 1960s with a man Ahmed called, capital letters in his voice, a Tikrit guy. Capital letters in his voice, obviously they're something that he was trying to emphasize that. A man from Saddam's hometown and tribe. Ahmed's father had shot the Tikrit guy in the leg, and the grudge had never faded because grudges were a national sport. The Tikrit guy had hounded Ahmed's father for years, pulling strings to punish him at every turn. So pulling strings there is this idea that he is creating a situation that's bad for Ahmed's father. And Tikrit, just if you didn't get it, is a place in Iraq, and it was Saddam Hussein's hometown. So the likelihood is that this guy was a Sunni, and also he was probably in favor with Saddam because he had the power of being from his hometown. Ahmed's father was arrested, imprisoned, and tortured 3 times under the old regime. So we've got that 3, that listing: arrested, imprisoned, tortured. She uses that technique quite a lot to really emphasize how bad things were as well. The second time, Ahmed's mother had sold everything they owned to raise $25,000. She'd given the cash to a corrupt official who in turn wrote a report claiming Ahmed's father had been executed in the desert, closed his file, and set him free. That was back in 1981, before Ahmed was born. His father, after stopping home long enough to conceive Ahmed, had escaped to Kuwait and found work with the British oil company. When he finally made it home 6 years later, he'd stuck around long enough to get his wife pregnant again before vanishing back into the government's clutches. This time his arrest was secret and the family couldn't track him down. So here, obviously, this idea that, even though he's faked his own death, he's still under the watch of the state. So it just kind of goes to show how much power and control the state had. All those 20 months we were looking for my father. Ahmed stared down into his teacup, memories dark and jumbled. My mother was pregnant, her abdomen was getting big. We didn't have a place to live, so we were living in rental houses. We moved 7, 8 times. We asked everyone. In the end, we found a way to get him out of jail. The family fled to Kabbalah, hoping to get off the Tikrit guy's radar. They stayed there until 1994, then moved to Najaf for a few years before finally, warily, creeping back to Baghdad. Okay, so Baghdad is their hometown, but they've lived this sort of transient lifestyle because they don't have much money, and also, they're trying to kind of protect their father. Those were long, grinding, sanctioned years, when Iraq lay frozen under Saddam and Ahmed plunged blindly into his youth. So 1994 onwards, obviously that's after the Gulf War, so that's in sanctions years means when Iraq was very, very poor because it was sanctioned by the Americans to make reparations after the war and towards Iran and stuff. And Iraq was frozen under Saddam. So this idea that, this metaphor that Saddam has it in his grip, okay, and people aren't able to do what they want. But nevertheless, Ahmed is plunging blindly into his youth. All right, he still has his youth. On languid summer days, he'd sleep until afternoon, find his friends, look for pretty girls in the market, and thrust his telephone number into their fingers in a fit of hormones and hope. Buy a sweet, cold ice cream cone, maybe see a movie. The hours clicked out in pool halls. I'm a professor of billiards, he says. So a nice humorous image here amongst all of the darkness and the destitution. We get this idea that, just like any other young lad, okay, he's full of hormones and he wants to chase girls. All right, so this element of the text is actually kind of normalizing this because he's just essentially Megan's kind of just portraying him like any other guy, all right? And I think that's what she discovers many ways in the text is that everybody's just people, and we're all going through different circumstances, and it's easy for the media to portray areas of the Middle East particularly as dark and terrible, but everybody just wants to live their own lives at the end of the day. Okay, when he says he's a professor of billiards, we've already heard that he can't afford to go to university even though he's really smart. So by saying he's a professor of like snooker, essentially, it kind of adds a bit of humour there, and kind of shows that a bit of wasted life as well. At midnight, he met the other runners for training, and they bounded like antelopes through the darkened streets, feet ponging off the blacktop, night hot as an oven's breath. Again, simile after simile. It was all in his voice, the boys moving like animals, the quiet intensity of the night, music slipping from parties, closed gates and silent windows and dark cars all sliding past the running boys. So whilst they're like in their youth and they're enjoying themselves, there's always these dark cars sliding past. There's always that fear in the background, that ominous element of state control, the possibility and the youngness. Ahmed ran until he was one of the best endurance runners in the country. They paid him $4 a month on the national team, so not very much money. But he didn't run for the money. He ran because he loved it, because it cut his world into a simple Manichaean place, neatly divided between good and evil. It was the combat as much as a race. So Manichaean is a type of religion or observation where you believe that something's good and something's evil. When you fight somebody, you're the good one and he's the bad one. And if you defeat him, I can't describe it when you live this moment, then you say you're the best. So for Ahmed, running was like his own little war, and to kind of show that he was like the best gave him a sense of comfort. Since the war, he had begun to lose his taste for running. He couldn't run anymore in open spaces. The students at the university taunted him as he bounded past. "Hey crazy, what are you doing?" Gunfire cracked his concentration. There is no emotion now. So running now for him is just about forgetting. Okay, he used to love it because it gave him a sense of purpose and it gave him a sense of success. But now, there's gunfire that's going off all the time. He's not allowed to run outside, and he's getting a lot of judgment from the people at the university, which is where he goes because that's basically the only place that he can run. Okay, so the running doesn't make him feel better now. It's just a numb thing for him. His thoughts spun in circles, swallowed their tails, and his feet pounded to earth over and over again. The students were ignorant, he thought. Many came from the south, same as his family. They've been in darkness for the 1980s and the 1990s, so what can you expect? Why was there nowhere better for running? First, because there was a war, and second, because he was poor. He dreamed of being a rich man. Then he could buy himself a treadmill and train at home. He could stay inside the four walls of his house all day long. He would never have to leave. He could buy the luxury of his own prison, one he designed and loved himself. So here we get this idea that, he doesn't blame people for kind of targeting him because he thinks that, the state has done a lot to keep people ignorant throughout the 80s and 90s. Okay? But he himself obviously is not, so he's obviously thought for himself. But what is his simple dream? His simple dream is to be a rich man so that he can buy a treadmill. And, there's a little bit of a comment here from Megan Stack about, what this actually means, your own prison. So comparing, those who live in rich houses here to being in prison because they basically have to stay away from everything as well. Instead, he works a poor man's job in a pharmacy. He hates it, and the pay is thin. So thin, not very much. His perfect English, the tongue he pieced together one word at a time during long dark hours hunched over a transistor radio, is languishing. Languishing means going away, falling behind. The words are slipping away. Sometimes he strikes up a quick conversation with the American soldiers, just for practice, but they don't say much. Hey, they say to Ahmed, what's up? So here I suppose, showing that the American soldiers aren't really engaging with the locals very much, and perhaps that's because they don't want to, or perhaps they are unable to, or they don't see the Iraqi civilians as people they want to get to know. All right, so there's a nice little hint there, included that these people don't see they don't understand or get each other. Then they move on. If Ahmed's father sees him approach the soldiers, he's in for a fierce fight. So some more tension between Ahmed and his father here. His father doesn't want him speaking English on the streets. The neighbors might suspect Ahmed of working with the Americans. That's where the money is. Ahmed knows it. Doesn't he know it? His friend came to him and offered him a job as a translator with the Americans. He won't do it. Too dangerous, he says. And then his face twists up and puts his teacup down and sets in to explain that he's not afraid, per se. It's just that his family can't afford his death. This is the manly choice, he explains. So here, kind of, this idea that, it's tempting to go and work with the Americans because that's where the money is. But Ahmed here says that, he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to let his family down. He says it's not because he's afraid. I don't mind dying because I'm faithful. I have an idea that you'll die on your day. But if I die, who will support my family? We don't even have a house now. Now he is talking quietly, glancing over his shoulder. So glancing over his shoulder, always that threat that's somewhere, okay? They killed one of my friends. He was working as a translator for the US Army. They took him from his home. His mother was worried. Okay, so here we have short sentences, kind of describing what's going on quite quickly. They took him. His mother was worried. All right, so these sharp sentences are there to kind of build up that tension. She called me and said, I don't know where he's gone. I said, don't worry. The next day they found him. They had cut his throat and wrote it on a piece of paper, don't work with foreigners or you will die. And they put that on his head. That made me cry for a week. He was 26. He'd been working off the fall of Saddam, but they threatened him and he left the job. I told him, don't go back. I think he told his mother, I'm going to sleep with my friends. But he was working. He didn't want to worry her. Now his mother is completely destroyed. So we see here like how fragile the situation is. People want to get this pay, but obviously it's very, very dangerous. Everybody's getting killed these days. You could be sitting out on the stoop like Ahmed's neighbour was a week ago and wind up dead. 4 militia thugs had rolled past, threatening people on the street. "We'll kill you," they said. "We swear we'll kill you." The neighbour punched their license plate into his cell phone. The gunmen saw. They made a U-turn, drove back to his house, and shot him cold. Just another disposable Iraqi soul, lifeless on a whim. So I've highlighted that line there because it kind of harks back to the Emitvial chapter as well, where it talked about the two souls that died at her funeral. So this idea of the Iraqis being just disposable souls and lifeless on a whim, showing how devalued human life is in this place at the moment. And then Ahmed follows this up. "My neighbour was 28 with green eyes. Ahmed has a habit of dragging his long skinny hands down his face, as if tracing the shape of a mask. So handsome." That was why Ahmed's father didn't want his son to leave the house. That was why the two screamed and fought like cats day after dreary day. Mostly they fought out the classic struggle. A restless Ahmed demanding independence, his father steeped in worry for his safety. But it cut deeper in Baghdad. So saying here that, this is a typical father-son conflict, the son wanting to kind of break away, the father wanting to keep control. But it's more dangerous here. The war wasn't everything. It's just that it never went away. Ahmed was fighting the timeless battles of being 23 years old, for adulthood, for a path through a hard world, for love. But the war was tangled up in everything, not wholly responsible for his woes, but tainting them, seeping into them, colouring everything. Another friend kept coming by the house. "I'm going to sneak into Europe," he told Ahmed. "I'm going to get a fake passport. I know a guy. You speak English. We can find work. It'll cost you 6,000. "Give me a break," Ahmed said. His friend went home, and then his mother started in. "Why don't you go?" she demanded. "This could be good for us." Ahmed stared at the ceiling all night. "I was thinking, if I go, what will they do? My father is 60. What if he can't get work? Who will support them? Even if I get there, maybe I'll get caught." So here we've got Ahmed and his mother trying to support him in getting away, and him just thinking about his family and having to look after his family. Okay, so this idea of family responsibility is in this text, and obviously also in Noit as well. So that's something that you can be having a look at. He heard about a way to get to America too, but it cost 12,000, and he didn't even know if the passport was real or counterfeit. "Now just Chinese can go to America, by containers," Ahmed said. It was one of the many moments I realized that Ahmed paid a lot of attention, not only to the world around him, but to everything. All that information was loaded up behind those dark, angry eyes, and sometimes the crumbs floated to the surface. Okay, so this is in reference to people smugglers smuggling Chinese nationals over to America, which was happening quite a lot at that time. So there's a picture there of the Chinese container ship there. All right. Now, this idea of Iraqi getting a passport for America being real or counterfeit, obviously, a lot of people wanted to leave. In these times, there were a lot of people affected by the war, but it was very hard to get visas and passports to go anywhere. All right, particularly to America. It's even more hard now. I don't think Iraqis are actually even allowed to go and visit. I've got a friend who's Iranian actually, and he's not allowed to go and visit America ever. So even though he fled as a refugee when he was a child, so interesting. But it's very difficult for people to get away, and obviously Ahmed is, really concerned about his family. So he knows that even if he gets away, the likelihood is that they won't get away. Ahmed had some relatives in Seattle and others in Minneapolis. His cousin came from America to spend a month, but he ended up taking off after 5 days. He came and saw and said, "What's this? It's hell. It's dead here." He got really upset. So Seattle and Minneapolis are obviously in America. Okay, so they are relatives who have made it to America. They come back and they see what it's like, and they are devastated. So that kind of shows you the comparison between what the life was like in America versus in Iraq, showing that it was a much better quality of living in America. One of his relatives has a company in America. He invited Ahmed to stay with him, work under the table for $8 an hour, and woo a woman into before his 90-day visa ran out. But how would he get a visa to begin with? His relative told him he needed to put 100,000 in a US bank account. He might as well have told Ahmed to lasso the moon and water ski over the Atlantic. So obviously, like the humour there, how ridiculous it is to suggest that he would be able to have that much money. Baghdad shifted like a kaleidoscope, the tortured fragments of the streets rearranging themselves into bloody walls, panicked faces, rubble piles, then scattering again. For a while, Ahmed's feverish face looked to me like the face of a city. So again, comparing his face to the face of the city, a bit like she did with Atwa. So these people who she meets, looking at them and seeing in them their devastated country. The trial of Saddam ground along that summer, but few people paid attention anymore. The Americans dropped two 500-pound bombs on Abu Musab al-Zakari one morning, but the insurgency was diffuse and powerful and protected by tribes, and at any rate the violence in those days had more to do with civil war than anti-American insurgency. Okay, so Abu Musab al-Zakari, who you've got a picture of over there, was a terrorist leader who had bombed hotels in Jordan, etc., and had targeted American and also in Iraq, and had targeted American military bases. Okay, so they took him out with two 500-pound bombs. So obviously there had been quite a bit of collateral damage. So there's this idea from Megan Stack that even though the Americans were trying to take out these targets, it didn't really have much of an effect overall because the insurgency was diffuse, which means that it wasn't all concentrated and couldn't deal with it that easily. They stopped buses of labourers, round up all the singers and slaughtered them. The bodies turned up constantly, tortured, executed, handcuffed, blindfolded. The country in the throes of a nervous breakdown. Every day was long and limp. I asked Suhail, one of the translators, how he could stand it, how Iraqis could bear to go on living like this. We were standing together in a room stuffed with computers and television, puzzling over another day of mass murder. Suhail fixed his thick glasses on his nose and answered immediately, precisely, as if he had been given this very question a good deal of thought, just waiting for somebody to ask. If you put a frog in boiling water and it will die immediately, he said. But if you put a frog in a pot of water and raise the temperature gradually, then the frog will survive even when the water is boiling. The frog survives because it's not receiving the heat in a lump sum. There is something called adaptation. Iraqis have been prepared for this. They received this gradually. When the regime fell, the horrors increased gradually and slowly. So here this guy is identifying that, the reason that these people are resilient, even though they're facing all of this stuff, is because they've adapted to the violence. So what seems to Ahmed's relative from America is something that's like hell. Here, they cope with it because it's something that they've been living with, all their lives, essentially, under Saddam, and now it's just getting worse and worse. So they're adapting to how bad it is. Ahmed almost never dreamed. He couldn't dream when he was depressed, only when he was happy. And since the war began, that was almost never. His family lived in a cramped rental house. Ahmed slept on a cushion on the hallway floor, lulled to sleep by the flash and croon of television. Sad songs, that's what he liked. Turkish songs, Mickey Mouse, Popeye and Sinbad, until sleep swallowed him swiftly down. When he was lucky enough to dream, it was always about her. He dreamed she was driving a convertible in the summertime, no headscarf, hair streaming loose and free behind her. In the dream, he stood on the side of the road and watched, yearning as she passed him by. So we've got this idea that, Ahmed just wants a normal life where he has this normal girlfriend, and he's quite influenced by this idea of romance and stuff. But this idea that she's passing him by and that he's not going to get that dream. This was his girlfriend, Barak, a 23-year-old temptress who tormented his days. Another night after we had started to meet at the Babylon Hotel, he dreamed that she married him in an enormous hotel, 400 floors arching into heaven like a layer cake of money and security, a sturdy tower of possibility and pleasant expectations. Ahmed, who could describe everything, had no words for the beauty of that dream. That was a dream. Daytime was different. I just love this particular contrasting image, okay? Because we've got, the dreams that people have in this world may be few, and when they wake up, they know that things aren't going to be like that. His girlfriend's described here as a temptress as well, so think about that as we circle back to this later. In the morning, his father came home from work as a night watchman and screamed at Ahmed for making too much noise, keeping him awake. Daylight meant the endless hunt for gasoline, which they needed for the generator. Ahmed and his father fought epic battles about that generator, driven half mad by the constant ancient male pressure to keep it filled. In waking hours, his father fell into debt and decided to sell the refrigerator. Ahmed couldn't bear it. Next time I'll sell the cushion I sleep on. You wake up one day and you can't find anything to sell. So he gave his father all the money he had, sold his fancy mobile telephone and took a cheaper model. He wore his old clothes. Students at the university, other men, taunted his girlfriend, told her she shouldn't waste time on a man whose prospects were so visibly shabby. They tell her, "Why'd you go with this guy? He always comes in the same clothes." While I talk with Ahmed, she pouts and rolls her eyes and wiggles her feet, watching her shoes flash while he talks in English. "What do you think I should do about this?" Ahmed says one day in anguish. "About work?" "No," he says, as if it's a foolish guess. "About this girl. My friend said you have to love her for a while. Maybe she'll begin to think of you seriously. She makes me suspicious. She makes fun of me. I know why she does this. She don't want to tell me the truth. She pretends most of the time, actually." Ahmed was fighting to keep her. He was besotted, obsessed. Maybe he needed that to get through the days, the illusion of working for something, the promise of payoff, pretty and good. Ahmed scraped together spare money to take her to restaurants sometimes. He took her to the internet cafes. "But not too much," he added quickly. "There's a lot of curious guys. She's a very beautiful girl, and she's not helping me with this. She says, 'Why are you getting angry? There's no reason.' There's no reason to get angry," she says. "I can't fall in love. Don't talk to me about this subject." I said, "No problem." She faced a lot of bad things in the past. So Ahmed's this really nice guy who's just making all these allowances for his girlfriend, okay? She seems like somebody who's really not that into him, and that's what Megan thinks as well. She was torturing him. Anybody could see that. Earlier in the war, they'd dated for 10 months. The first 60 days we flew to the stars together, he says. So she got inside my heart. They squabbled and split. She started dating another student, a man Ahmed knew. "We don't like each other, but we smile, face each other, say hello, how are you," he muttered darkly. 7 months after they'd broken up, they bumped into each other on the campus. All the feelings came back to Ahmed, all in a wash. He began to spend a little time with her. Just friends, they agreed. She needed to go to the doctor to check on a skin rash, and he gave her a lift. Afterward, Ahmed bared his soul. "I'm starting to love you," he said. "I can't call you my friend now they were together every day, and Ahmed was living a sweet torment." "I can't reach anything with her," he told me woefully. "She always gives you a different opinion. I don't know how I should do, what I should think. It's strange for me, because I'm always thinking the right thing, doing the right thing. Not with her. Sometimes she's trying to trick me. I'm sure of something, but she says, 'No, it's not like that.'" She knew when she was being discussed. She'd sit up straighter, bat her hazel eyes, and rub against her chair like a cat, in an awkward, exaggerated imitation of wiles she'd seen on television. She was all dressed up in a skirt cut from a tulle, like a ballerina's tutu, woven with sequins of silver and gold, tottering forth on high heels, chubby fingers heavy with rings, eyes weighted down under thick, runny makeup. Okay, so this description of Ahmed's girlfriend Birak is one that's quite negative. Kind of reminds you a little bit of the way that she described the gift shop as well. Okay, so whereas she sees Ahmed as somebody who is almost pure in his intent, she sees this girl in the way that he's portrayed her to him as well, as somebody who is focused on the material things in life. Ahmed and I both looked at her. The one thing I dreamed in my life was to make her love me, he said balefully, but it's too hard. So balefully is kind of like angrily and regretfully. With Ahmed, I couldn't make it clean. Why did he keep coming, risking his life? Was he bored? Curious? Did he hope that I'd give him money or help get him a visa? Maybe he just wanted to impress his girlfriend, to show her that an American woman found him so fascinating she bought him tea and spent hours copying his words into lined notebooks. Maybe he himself didn't know. Perhaps he just said yes because I'd asked and he wanted to see what would happen. And there I was, sopping at puddles of spilt words, sponging it all onto paper. He was a character and a type. Okay, so we've got this idea that Ahmed is. She doesn't understand why Ahmed keeps going to her. She knows that it's dangerous, and she's like, "Well, why is he doing this?" She suspects perhaps then that he's trying to impress his girlfriend. Um, and here we get this idea that she's just collecting all of his words to create this character for her story. Even as he spoke, I was seeing him as a soul built of black letters on a bright electronic backdrop, a spine and legs and arms constructed of short newspaper paragraphs, representing a generation, representing a sect. So here, like, this arches back to the start of the chapter where she said she'd gone deliberately searching for a a Shiite um, young Iraqi, who would represent the country. Okay, so she's admitting here that as she's writing this down, she just sees him as a story. She's not seeing necessarily the humanity in him. She's saying to us that journalists, in what they do, are actually constructing, the lives of these people they're talking to purely to make a story. All right. So this is quite negative. This is self-reflectively negative on Megan herself, because it's quite um, uh, formulaic what she's doing. It's quite emotionless. The fact that she's just collecting him to put him on the electronic backdrop, i.e., her computer. Imagining how his words would reconstruct themselves for a reader, hoping these quotations I snatched up would transport Americans into this boy's world, into this filthy, exhausted war. I wanted that badly from Ahmed, the impression he left. I was trying to steal, not his soul, but his shadow. So here, it's saying that, she wants to create this view of the Iraqis for Americans and sees him as representing them. I was pushing my luck, asking for too many meetings. I wanted Ahmed's story to be good. I knew I'd never be able to visit his home, but I sketched diagrams as he described the rooms, the kitchen, the family tree, and the Quranic verses framed on the wall, the nylon bag where he kept his few pieces of clothing. Then I had a better idea. I'd give him a camera, and he could shoot pictures of his home, his world. Okay, so you can see here that there's maybe an ethical line being crossed by Megan in that she might be expecting too much from this guy, and she was even going to give him a camera. We already know how dangerous it is for him, so imagine what would happen, what the implications would be if he was caught with that camera. We never got around to it. One day I met Ahmed as usual at the restaurant in the Babylon Hotel, and as usual, Birak came along, but something was askew. They were quarrelling, lapsing into Arabic in front of me. Her features were knit. She held her tongue. She gazed at the table. Ahmed stared down, defiant. So there are clues here that something bad has happened. Okay, we've got the short sentences again, but this, something was askew. They were quarrelling. All right, and they're going into their own language. Is everything okay? I asked. Yes, Ahmed snapped. So here he's snapping. He's not his usual self. Then some men moved into the restaurant and she tugged on his sleeve. So remember, there's always that threat of somebody in the background, okay? She's tugging on his sleeve. She obviously doesn't want to be there. And that's because the men at the restaurant are there. Well, Ahmed said, actually there is a problem. She has been recognized. Recognized. Cold fear shot through my veins, pushing from my heart all the way down to my toes. What happened? My pulse bulged in my throat. As we were coming in downstairs at the door, she saw somebody she knows from university. This guy, he's strong. He's somebody. You know what I mean? So when you call him somebody, okay, that means that he is part of an organization, all right? So he's one of the people that you wouldn't want to recognize you because something bad might happen. Yes, he was involved in one of the armed groups. So this guy, he says to her, "What are you doing here?" And she says, "Nothing, just coming to spend a little time." And he says, "You're not going to meet with that American upstairs, are you?" She said, "No, of course not. What do I want to do with an American?" And he says, "Good, because you know if you were meeting with an American, there would be consequences." Consequences. That American upstairs. But Ahmed is still talking. So these italics here are Megan Stack's thoughts, the idea that there will be consequences, and she knows that she is the American upstairs. "Well," he says, "we thought he was leaving, but now he has just come into the restaurant. He has seen us, and he has seen you, and he knows we are together." I sit perfectly still, frozen, understanding what it means. I know, we all know, that this could be as good as a death sentence for Ahmed and Birak, and there is absolutely nothing I can do about it. There would be consequences. So here, remember, that's the title of this chapter. So we've got that there are going to be consequences for the fact that she has been meeting with this guy and now he has been recognized. Nobody will touch them here. It wouldn't happen like that. If it comes, it will come to them later. Nobody will believe I'm a journalist. They will think that these two are collaborators. The best they can hope for is an empty threat. But people will remember. This label will stay on their heads for years. Secret meetings with an American. So in a similar way to how Ahmed's father's stuff haunted him for years, there's a recognition here that people hold grudges, that this would follow him forever. "What do you want to do?" I asked Ahmed. "Do you want to leave?" "No," he says. Suddenly I can't think of a single question to ask. The blood won't get out of my face. Birak fusses. She's barely touching her tea. She whispers to Ahmed, "Are you sure you don't want to leave?" She wants. "Maybe it's a good idea. Why don't you two go first?" We never walk out to the parking lot together. "Okay," he says. "I'll call you." They are gone. So that simple sentence there, "they are gone," all right, indicates that she knows exactly what's happened here. They've gone, even though they've taken all these precautions, like never going out to the parking lot together, trying not to be seen in public. This just shows the fragility of the situation here, okay? So as a journalist, she has a responsibility for the safety of the people that she's interviewing, and she obviously has this guilt inside of her. Now, I pay the bill and walk out into Baghdad's sordid steam. So again, the illustration of the S's there building up how hot and almost like a pressure cooker it is in Baghdad. So throughout this chapter, there have been references to how hot it is in Baghdad, and obviously that can be referred to the political situation as well. Back at the bureau, my Iraqi colleagues tried to make me feel better. Maybe it was a joke, they said. Iraqis say anything and you can't tell if it means something. There was worry in their eyes. So here indicating that, even though they're trying to make her feel better, there's worry in their eyes, which indicates that they know exactly what's going to happen to Ahmed and Birak. It's true. The problem with Iraq is that you just can't tell. What begins as a notion hardens into truth. Threats and jokes turn into suggestions, take on plausibility, and then achieve reality. Impossible things happen every day. The blood of Iraqis has gotten cheap. All of that is the problem with Iraq. So we've got this metaphor of the Iraqi blood being cheap here, and just highlighting how much death there is in this country at the moment. Ahmed's telephone never rang again. It was permanently switched off. He might have gotten scared and changed it, but I don't think so. His determination was too fierce to cower. His sense of courtesy too deep-rooted for him to vanish without an explanation. Unless perhaps he was embarrassed. Unless Birak threatened to leave him. Unless he got so rattled he told his father the truth that his father locked him up in the house. I have invented 100 scenarios to explain his disappearance. They lie like a flimsy mat over a tiger trap of sorrow and guilt. Okay, so here we've got this idea that, she thinks that he never answers the phone again. The telephone never rang again. Um, she knows that he doesn't have much money, so it's very implausible that he would have been able to swap his telephone. She comes up with all of these suggestions again, using the starts of sentences with that repetition. Unless this happened, unless this happened, unless this happened. She's inventing reasons why he might still be alive. But then she gets to the real point of what she's getting at. The scenarios, the hypothetical things that could have happened to him. She knows they're very unrealistic, and the likelihood is that Ahmed and Barak would have been killed because of meeting with her. And so she has this flimsy mat over a tiger trap of sorrow and guilt. So this amazing imagery of, like a tiger trap is something that is hidden in the jungle, all right, usually covered with a mat, and it's just saying that she's trying to put this cover over how much sorrow she feels for Ahmed. We know that she respected him, but also the guilt that she feels because she talks about just wanting to use his story and not necessarily seeing him always as a human. So that has come back to bite her. It's not just the Iraqi terrorists and American soldiers here who are treating Iraqis as cheap. She now recognizes that the journalists, herself included, are also doing that. The truth is, I don't even know if they made it home from the Babylon hotel that day. I don't know if they lived through that summer or the summer after that. Maybe he is alive somewhere. Maybe he made it out to Europe or to America. I want to believe that he's unscathed, not just breathing in body but whole in spirit too, that the woman he worshipped was not hurt, that his heart was not broken. Either way, I know that I am guilty. I took a chance with their lives, walked up to the table, and gambled. I came to Iraq in a cloud of violence, part of an American plague. So she compares herself to the American army as part of a plague. All right? There's no clearer imagery in this book about how she feels about American intervention in the Middle East. Okay? She recognizes that herself, she has been implicated in this violence now. All right? Just by being here. Wanting to record these stories to kind of make them human, she's actually making it worse. I lured him in with the seductive promise that he was interesting to American readers, that his life had meaning beyond his daily world, and that his experiences mattered enough to document. For a young man like Ahmed, shunted aside and mocked, it must have been like a drug. So now she's saying that she is the temptress. Earlier on in the chapter, she said that his girlfriend was a bit of a temptress, okay, but now she's saying that she was that, and she used her power irresponsibly. All of that for a story I never wrote. Newspaper stories ought to have endings, and Ahmed's tale didn't. It just stopped. So here, by finishing the chapter like that, it highlights to us that, the world doesn't fit neatly into these stories that we like to tell ourselves. Okay, she wasn't able to publish this newspaper article because she didn't have all of the information she needed. So his life that she potentially ruined was worth, nothing because she didn't even get a story. So I think, the way that she does this is to highlight to us that, in conflict, everybody has a responsibility to others, all right, and the journalists certainly have a responsibility to those that they are reporting on, and in this respect, she did not take that responsibility seriously, and in doing so, highlighted to us that foreign intervention in conflicts that they don't necessarily understand can often make them much worse.